Some of you, well, I guess maybe none of you really have had a chance to meet her. Our oldest daughter, Linda, and her family live in Dunlap. Dunlap is that community just north of Peoria. Now, if you start out at our house and you head straight west, and you just keep going and keep going and keep going, you will end up almost in Linda and Tim's driveway. Except for one little problem. And you who have driven that route know what the problem is. Somewhere between here and there is this thing called the Illinois River. Now, I am not interested in finding out whether my car knows how to swim, but unless your car does know how to swim, you get to the Illinois River and you've got to do something. You've got to go north up to Route 17, or you've got to go down just a little ways to Route 150, someplace where somebody built a bridge to get you across the river. Because when there's a river involved, until cars learn how to swim, somebody has to help. Somebody has to help you get from this side of the river to the other side of the river somehow or other. And most of the time, that happens on a bridge. Back when we were in Mendon over on the Mississippi River, there were certain times during the year when they were transporting grain, when the grain elevator on the Missouri side of the river would run a little ferry. This ferry would haul grain trucks back and forth across the river, and if the ferry was operating and you got there in time, you could get on the ferry with the grain trucks and get a shortcut across the river. So there are other ways, but most of the time, the way across the river is the bridge that somebody has to build to help us get from here to there, from one side to the other. And it's not just cars that need some help. Sometimes people need some help getting from here to there, because the chasm is deep and wide, because the river is swift, because the ice is treacherous. Sometimes people need help getting from here to there, literally sometimes, and metaphorically too. Even when we might be able to make it alone, it's easier and safer and sometimes a lot more fun if we can help each other get from here to there. And so you and I, we learn to depend on bridge people who help us get from here to there. And if I hear today's scriptures rightly, you and I are called to be bridge people as a part of our faith. Bridge people for each other and bridge people together, because often this is not a solitary act. The writer to the letter of the Hebrews begins where you and I live. Everybody needs a priest, the writer says. Everybody needs a priest. Everybody needs somebody who is put in charge of the things pertaining to God on our behalf. That's just how it is. The gap between God and me is too great. The gap between God and you is too great. Somebody has to stand there and bridge the gap between God and us. And that's what priests do. They bridge the gap. Now, nobody is born a priest, not even Jesus. Priesthood is a learned vocation, and you learn the vocation by living. Oddly enough, by living some of the moments that are maybe not your finest moments. The priesthood is learned more from life's sinful moments. The priesthood is learned more from life's suffering moments. The priesthood is learned more from life's weaker moments. Anybody here ever sinned? Anybody here ever suffered? So congratulations, you're already in seminary, you're on your way toward ordination, you're on your way toward becoming priests. That's what we read in the book of Hebrews. You heard the words, the mortal priests, the human priests, the priests who are subject to death like you and me. The mortal priests know how to deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, because why? They themselves are wayward, and they themselves are ignorant. And Jesus, although we firmly believe that he was sinless, so he was not wayward, and wouldn't call him ignorant, but he had to learn things too, just like the rest of us. Jesus had to take some classes in this seminary called life before he was ready to be the high priest. It said so right there. The writer in the Hebrews said so. In the days of Jesus' flesh, he offered up prayer and supplication with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. The essence of that suffering, it happened in a variety of places along his life, but the core of it, the central part of that suffering is the part of the gospel that we have begun to read now as we read through Mark's gospel. By about the middle of Mark's gospel, Jesus has turned the corner from all of these various journeys that he made and is now, piece by piece by piece, mile by mile, making his way toward Jerusalem. This time for the final time. This time to the journey to Jerusalem, the journey to the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's that hymn that we sang before the sermon that calls to mind the crying and the tears and the supplications, the struggle that Jesus went through in the Garden of Gethsemane, the journey to Golgotha. This was the last big set of classes. This was the big final exam. This is when Jesus will learn what he needs to know and what he needs to understand so that he can become the high priest, the priest that you and I need. And it says in the letter that he passed the exam with flying colors. Telos is the Greek word, and if it means perfect, it means perfect in this sense. It means that Jesus accomplished the purpose of the classes. He met the goal of the test. And the goal of the test, we heard it twice last Sunday as the writer is sneaking up to it, sort of building up to help us understand the goal. Last Sunday we heard that the writer saying that the goal of all of this was to make Jesus sympathetic and understanding. The writer said last week that all of this was to make Jesus ready and eager to welcome us when we come with our needs and our concerns, because Jesus has been there. He has struggled with what we struggle with. He has suffered with what we suffer. So he is able to understand. He's able to be sympathetic. And he's able to welcome us when we come with our needs. And so last Sunday we heard the words that we are to come boldly, confidently, because the one to whom we come is someone who knows and understands. And now the writer carries that on to its conclusion. What was perfected in Jesus, the writer says, is that now he is the source of eternal salvation. The source of eternal salvation for everyone who obeys him. And so the one who has suffered comes near to the one who suffers. The one who has struggled comes near to the one who struggles. And in the name of the great bridge person, Jesus, the great bridge person, you and I who sometimes sin, and you and I who are sometimes ignorant, and you and I who are sometimes wayward, you and me and us together, we become bridge people to each other. We come near to each other to help each other get from here to there. And that's the point, of course. That's the point. But you and I, we don't always get the point. Neither do James and John get the point. So one of the commentators I was reading suggests that you and I, we have some Zebedee DNA in our genes too, because we don't get the point in much the same way sometimes as James and John don't get the point. Might not be quite as blunt about it as they were. Jesus, grant us to sit, one of us on your right hand and one of us on your left hand, when you come into your glory. Give us those places of honor. Were they being naive? Were they pretty sure that when this struggle ended, when this battle ended, they would be heroes who had earned the honor, earned the right? I guess it's rather easy to be brave and heroic before the battle, before the test, and they had not yet been tested. Or maybe they were reading the handwriting on the wall pretty well, and maybe they were afraid. Maybe they wanted to nail Jesus down. Let's get something about this future. Nail down Jesus. Fear of terrorism, for example, drives us to do all sorts of insanely crazy things. We try to nail down a future for ourselves too, so we can understand how that might have been the case. But Jesus, after he listens to what they have to say, the only thing Jesus nails down in the text is a future that nobody wants. The water in the baptismal font, Jesus said, will become like fire. The wine in the communion chalice will become like vinegar. The glory will find its meaning in the cross, and in that story, who was on the right hand and who was on the left. You remember? Jesus says there will be trials and there will be tribulations. Sometimes because that's just the way life is, and sometimes because hatred and prejudice will turn into persecution. There will be trials and tribulations, and so none of us is going to make it from here to there on our own. Not the great ones, not the small ones, so there really isn't any point in trying to play that game. Jesus says, being bridge people will be more productive. Being priests for each other will become much more helpful. The listening and the understanding, the holding and the consoling and the encouraging. In the name of Christ, being with each other as servants. Now in the story, of course, Jesus is the great servant, Jesus does for us what none of us can do for ourselves and what none of us can do for each other. Jesus is the great servant. He gives his life as a ransom. He gives his life as a ransom to liberate the slaves, to release the hostages, to set the prisoners free, to bring them from there to here, to the place of freedom, to the place of wholeness, to the place of life. Jesus does what we cannot do in the way that he serves us, and he becomes then the great bridge person. The great servant serves by being the great bridge person. He bridges the gap from slavery to freedom. He bridges the gap from exile to homeland. He bridges the gap from sin to salvation. He bridges the gap from sickness to wholeness. He bridges the gap from addiction to cleanness. He bridges the gap from hatred to love, from coldness to compassion, from death to life. He bridges the gap even from life to life everlasting. And as he bridges the gap, he takes your hand and he takes my hand, helps us walk across the gap. And he says to us as we go, offer your other hand to somebody else who is nearby, somebody who needs the helping hand just as much as you need it, just as much as I need it. Through the one who offers himself as ransom, our lives become ransom too. Our lives may offer hope to the hostage. Our lives may offer help to the hurting. Our lives might offer forgiveness to the fallen. Our lives might offer grace to the sinner. And that's our calling. That's our calling. Our calling is to be those bridge people. Bridge people who owe our very lives to the great bridge person. The one who was wounded for our transgression. The one who was crushed for our iniquity. The one upon whom was laid the punishment that makes us whole. The one by whose bruises we are healed. We owe our lives to the great bridge person who calls us to be bridge people. So go build bridges, people, and go be bridges. This is our calling. This is who we are.